welcome everyone to this regathering of the PCC Forum. It's been some time since some of you have seen this, and we're excited to bring it back into motion. And for this one, we are happy to invite Orland Bishop, who is a lineage holder in the African Gnosis tradition and holds practices in phenomenology and consciousness studies. He is the founder and director of Shaditri Multicultural Foundation, a human development initiative based in Los Angeles. Orland's work over the past 25 years has served in the development of individuals working in many fields for the emergence of meaningful futures. Orland has served as an advisory to over 40 organizations and networks working in healing, peacemaking, social capital development, economic development, and human development. He is a recognized thought leader in many communities and countries for his pioneering work in agreements for creative living. He holds ancestral shrines in West Africa and South Africa and facilitates work in the recovery of ancestral wisdom. He is also the author of The Seventh Shrine, Meditations of the African Spiritual Journey from the Middle Passage to the Mountaintop. And in dialogue with him today will be Matthew Segall, a philosopher, educator, and transdisciplinary researcher specializing in process philosophy and the intersection of science and spirituality. His scholarship focuses the implications of Alfred North Whitehead's organic realism for contemporary natural, scientific, and philosophical discourse, emphasizing the participatory nature of knowledge and reality. His most recent book is titled Crossing the Threshold, Etheric Imagination in the Post-Kantian Process Philosophy of Schelling and Whitehead. And he blogs regularly at footnotesofplato.com. And we're happy to be co-hosting this with the Black Indigenous practice of CIS. And the first half of this will be the dialogue between Matt and Orland. And then second half, we will be opening it up for questions, comments, and a larger dialogue. So without further ado, I will hand this off to Matt.
Well, thank you, Afshin. Good to see everyone here. So glad this is happening. Thanks also to Preston at the Center for Black and Indigenous Praxis for co-sponsoring this. I'm actually going to hand it off to Orland, who's going to welcome us with some words, and then he and I will talk for a bit before opening it up to the wider community here. So please, Orland, the floor is yours.
Oh, thank you so very much. Since the inspiration to have this forum and arriving here this evening, so much has happened in my own life work, but this has been building a tremendous amount of inspiration for me. And I really thank you for the invitation to be together this evening for this discourse. And to my dear friend, Michael, your gift of this intention was very much the start for me to understand that there is a need to explore, particularly the practice that we're holding of sacred hospitality. And CIS has been in my life for probably close to 25 years through different friends who are alumni and who have been faculty as well with your institution. So it's quite an important signature that this opportunity comes from you to have this discourse this evening. And within our time, you know, a thunderstorm is just passing over where I live now here in Southern California. I'm in Riverside County in the community of Paris. And I lived in Los Angeles for the last 40 years, and this is the first time outside of the city zone directly, but not outside of the elemental forces that attract people to this particular location of culture. And for a particular path of of interest. This is really what I'm here to do, to be present with what passes through our world from moment to moment, and what is the long arc of interest that humanity has been carrying to make sure that we meet like how we are meeting today, choosing a theme and choosing to be hosts for the creative act. So deep gratitude and recovery as well. Best regards as well to your colleague who could not be with us this evening. And gratitude for her making the space for us to share this time. So Michael, yes, Matt, sorry, Matt, may we begin?
Actually, my mother considered Michael when she was naming me, but chose Matthew instead. Maybe you intuited that. But yes, it's a delight to join you in this capacity. I'm up in Northern California, in Oakland, just across the bay from CIIS, and discovered a couple of weeks ago in preparation for this that you were here in 2019 to give a talk to the Women's Spirituality Program, I believe, during a conference that they had on the nature of money, which I know is something you've thought a little bit about. But tonight, with our title that we sort of collectively birthed in our planning meeting, Sacred Hospitality and the Dynamics of Initiation, Inspiring Activism Beyond Resentment. I wanted to begin by asking if you could share a little bit about what you mean by initiation. I have been reading your book, The Seventh Shrine, Meditations on the African Spiritual Journey. And in that book, you say right at the beginning that you have come to understand the highest prerogative of the soul is initiation, and that this process of initiation has something to do both with memory and inheriting ancestral wisdom, and also with gaining the capacity to imagine the future. But I think in our time, in this place, meaning this continent and this country at this moment in its history, it's difficult to even know what to call our time. Is this modernity? Is this post-modernity? Is this hyper-modernity? And I think that's a reflection, that uncertainty is a reflection of the lack of initiation in our time. We don't know when we are. We don't really know where we are. We don't know the history of this land. Many Americans don't know the history of this land. And so what does initiation mean to us today? And what did it mean also? And what can it mean today, perhaps, would be the right way to frame the question.
Yeah, it has been a long interest for me to understand this field of human life experience. It is initiations, it is actually the longest continuous exercise in the human social, cultural, and developmental process. One can say from inception or even conception, the archetypal forces that give rise to the human form is initiating an intelligence to be able to receive processes from the supersensible world and bring it into coherence and in a certain way into capacities for how life could then be fulfilled. The old phrase, as above, so below, is the kind of pedagogy for initiation. There is something in the supersensible world outside of time that is interested to becoming localized in a receptive intelligence. And we have nature that has done that in all its magnificence to provide an ecology that allows different beings to interact and provide a living substance out of that. the human being brings something quite unique in the exercise of our development from conception to birth and then into the stages that follow. And at this point of conception, there is a memory that carries the human intelligence into world becoming. And this was understood because in the earlier aspects of civilizations, there were those seers who could observe the phenomena of what accompanied the human being into existence. And they retain this observational field to support the person becoming more like the forces that follows human existence. And they developed different kinds of formulas that they call the mysteries, magic, all of these things. Eventually, it became what we now call the intellect. The intellect is and has been a pathway of initiatory disciplines, focused until it became a faculty for cognition of those forces that then maintained three categories of intelligence, imagination, inspiration, and intuition. So from the time that our intellect has grasped these supersensible forces and localized it as a field of intelligence in which it could interact with itself, certain pathways of initiations were lost. We no longer depend upon the higher sources for the utilization of the mysteries. And we created disciplines that then became formulations for how we interact as a civilization. But they will say the forces never stop streaming their potentialities towards the human life. And so anyone can re-enter into the mysteries. And in some ways, we are doing it either by what we call synchronicity or even accidents. But the human being is never without this higher calling to reunite with the superconscious and aid our civilization to become a greater host for what was the source of our own existence. So that would be, I would say, a simple backstory. The complexity is that the beings who are interested in our development remain mostly invisible to us and outside of the lower perceptible faculties. And so we now rely on, we call knowers, people with certain kinds of intelligence, your faculty, and other people who dedicate the discipline of their heart and minds to the exercise of developmental knowledge that supports academic interests in how we utilize our creative forces.
So you mentioned the importance of hosting memories of the ancestors, hosting other spiritual beings, and that initiation somehow opens us to that possibility. And this, of course, relates to the other aspect of our title, sacred hospitality. And I wonder if you could say something about the importance of hosting and hospitality and being of recognizing our role as human beings as beings of service. I know in your book you talk about the divine being itself really essentially about service, and that you say service is the highest initiation of our age. And so in the context of inspiring a certain kind of activism. Why is it important to keep the sacredness, the sanctity of hospitality in mind?
Yeah. It's not a new practice. This so sacred hospitality has been in many traditions, going back into our far past. But it's essential for our time now because of the civilization of the egoity. Our ego consciousness has pulled away from being in service of co-creating. And it's a discipline now that's required to be able to support building an ecology and consciousness that understands that the predisposition for language, the predisposition for a shared understanding, the predisposition for agreement live within the ego as an intelligence that recognizes itself, that can also recognize the other. So there is a particular framework in consciousness that allows two or more to cognize something that one ego by itself would not be able to achieve. A level of coherence about what we call future, right? The future is determined by something that emerges from dialogue with entities, human and others. And so it requires me letting go of something of my own self-interest and allowing something to return to me that utilizes my particular capacities in a very different way. If I only choose to use my faculties for myself, I repeat certain patterns, and those patterns themselves block me from becoming self-conscious on other levels. A dialogue is the utilization of a field of intelligence that resides somewhere else and allow me to keep moving through my own boundaries and perceiving creative potentials in others that then become, I say, liberated above and beyond my own self-knowing. And this particular reality, one can say, underlies every civilization and every indigenous wisdom tradition, that we are actually utilizing this particular call and response faculty that allows people to then understand that they can organize the will to be attentive to something that one can say is prophetic or philosophical, whereby we put our intention into an ideal striving and not to self-fulfillment. It is in the philosophical idealism that we can point to the fact that there is something that a human being dedicates to the outer reality and not to ourselves. We will never find idealism in ourselves. We find it by the act of giving and feeling free in our act of giving that allows a receptive will to mature, a will that is empty yet capable of transcending my own personal limitations and provide a context for assimilating intuitive certainty of realities.
I so appreciate what you say about the importance of dialogue. And if you'll indulge me for a moment, I thought of a line from Johann Wolfgang von Goethe that has always struck me. He says that he's always been suspicious of this, he says, great and important sounding task, know thyself. This has always seemed to me a deception, he says, practiced by a secret order of priests who wish to confuse humanity with impossible demands, to divert attention from activity in the outer world to some false inner speculation. The human being, he continues, knows himself only insofar as he knows the world. He perceives the world only in himself and himself only in the world. And then he adds, the greatest help comes from our fellow human beings. They have the advantage of being able to compare us with the world from their own standpoint, and thus they know us better than we ourselves can. Which I feel is, I hope that this resonates with what you were trying to share with us, in the sense that in dialogue we come to know ourselves from the other's perspective better than we could on our own.
And this is the fundamental, we say, structure of knowledge. The knower doesn't have the knowledge of what we will become. The knower takes a risk in becoming. So knowledge is not the finality of the exercise of will and consciousness. There is a gap beyond our knowledge that supports an act of freedom. And this is really what dialogue allows. There is a freedom that I have to allow if what I share would be understood by you. I don't give you my understanding. I give you my trust for understanding. And this space where something else that depends on faculties that mature only in the experience of doing it, like trusting, then I get an inner feeling that you are not only attentive to what I'm sharing, but creating something out of it. And I get to experience your creation of my gift of what I shared. This unique feeling, this cognitive feeling, is what we can call truthfulness. We could use it until something else is revealed that emerges from our essence of mutual interest. And this, for me, is in the phenomenological space where language is not to obstruct understanding, but to support it. And is not to, in a certain way, violate the capacity of intelligence of the other, but to host it. And so, again, just as you shared from Goethe, he also said, like, what is more precious than gold? And he said, light. And what is more quickening than light? Conversation. Conversation can do more than what has not happened in the last 1,000 years. If we host the conversation at the level of trust, that in our mutual interest, something can happen now that could not happen before. And this is in the space of the power of the word, or the word nature. We're doing something with what we call the word. And before the world existed, the word exists. The word is the fact that there is a coherence field in which two or more could understand the practicality of knowledge. And applied knowledge opens up other realities that not only bypasses perception in its limited ways, but nurture cognition in which we could actually elevate the human mind to the intuitive plane, in which beings whose intelligence is light, meaning they form radiances that allows worlds to be understood. Where the worlds come from? They come from light. And the interest of other beings in our conversations.
So, Orland, you speak out of an understanding of reality that includes our visible physical forms, but it also includes so much more than that. At one point in your book, you write about the nature of the soul being to evolve our bodies, and you talk about the way in which our, as you've been saying just now, our speech embodies us in a way. We become what we say. And typically we imagine language as just a means of communication. I make some noises with my mouth, it vibrates through the air, and in this case, through various electronic means, and then comes back through the air to your ears, and some kind of information is being transferred. That's how we usually think about it in a physical sense. But what you're describing in terms of the word or the logos is that actually, before I even say anything, we are immersed in this medium of meaning, which made the very world that we inhabit. And when we speak, we're actually, through the gift of these physical bodies, yes, we're vibrating air, but somehow the meaning is already there in the medium which is vibrating, and we participate in that in a way. But can you speak to the relationship between the word as a spiritual reality and our physical existence, our earthly existence, and what is it that is really going on spiritually when we engage in conversation in a way that is allowing for the hosting of one another and the hosting of spiritual beings beyond what we can immediately perceive with our physical senses?
Yeah, it is as if, Matt, that the creators of world intelligence knew that we would need the word literally now to trace our story, because we've become now only capable of understanding reality by the literal descriptions of certain phenomena, the language descriptions of them. We no longer have the inner cognitive feeling for certain other states of reality. We cannot be without human language, human speech for a very long time. Right? This is, we feel insecure if no one speaks to us. And I'm glad that there are Vipassana meditation retreats that can give people 10 days of silence to just get into other states of openness to silence, which is another level of speaking. Imagining, which is another level of speaking. Intuiting, which is another level of speaking. It's just a question, who are we in dialogue with? What is the word that is streaming when I'm in inspirational flow? Why do creators do something with inspiration that results in a phenomena of reality in the world? In the sense perceptible world, we can hear music, we can understand the geometrical form of an architectural design, we can understand a mathematical calculation into an engineered reality. But what happens to our blood when we are in silence, like in sleep? What is going on? Who is communicating to our subconscious and unconscious when we are no longer capable of remaining awake? This is a fascinating space where researchers can't really go because they have no one to speak with. And so it's left up to people who have other kind of capacities to go into the night forces of the human life, into the unconscious forces of the human life, and investigate creative options to allow a person who cannot use language to still experience meaning and allow us to develop new faculties for coherence. It is imperative now that we know this discipline because people with autism will require it. They will require people to be able to give meaning without the predictable, sense perceptible processes that we call communication. And we are going into other levels in which people with certain other mental challenges, schizophrenia and other things, to ask who is speaking and from where, which time do these multiple personality disorders are occurring across different bandwidths of time. A human receptacle of body can allow the neurotransmitters to receive multiple dispensations of intelligences. I mean, I go into ceremonies in West Africa and Brazil and other places where mediumship allows other entities to take hold of the human form and express beautiful, beautiful creative intentions for healing and development of community life that is not available to ordinary intelligence. And these rituals have been going on for thousands of years in different communities of practice. And so part of what I'm pointing to in the idea of the word was not always literal. The word was considered the utilization of the will forces of other beings to create different levels of, say, perceptible boundaries and opportunities for people to climb out of unconsciousness and into superconscious exercise of creativity. And I, from my own experience in different areas of practice, to move beyond the perceptional realm to cognitive realms in which two or more human beings could agree that something is true without any evidence of it being, we say, practically given. This is for me has been the most rewarding areas of my research and work, to cognize realities in sleep and offer more options for people who are limited by their physical capacities, meaning people in prison who cannot get out of that space could still utilize other faculties to achieve greater works in reality than if they were out with the free mind running around looking for a job.
This is Philo. He's decided to join us. So you spoke to the way in which the word actually is still present even in silence. And earlier you were speaking about trust and the importance of trust for us to know together, to know anything together, and to make agreements with one another. And when I look at this country, and I think something similar is happening in many other countries which have thought of themselves as democracies right now, this capacity to trust one another is breaking down, is fraying. And so it seems like a consequence perhaps of societies and individuals trying to live, or maybe not even knowing that they're living without initiation. And so I wonder if you could speak to the consequences of, what it is to live in a society where initiation is not culturally valued, and maybe sometimes it happens on accident or individuals here and there seek it out, but overall it isn't any longer considered to be an essential aspect of a human life, nor a shared coexistence together. What are the consequences of that, and what might those who want to be involved in making change in forms of activism, what should they know about this situation?
Yeah, it's in elemental theory. meaning in systems of initiation that had the procedure, as we said, alchemical procedure of one element becoming the other. So if we considered the four basic elements that in many cosmologies, earth, air, fire, water, these are qualities of divinities. Not only we can recognize them in their substantive form in the perceptible world, but one can say they are attributes of entities beyond the human archetypal expression. And they shape ecologies in nature and in consciousness, and provide motives within our personal and collective unconscious that then becomes dramatized, mythologized, and put into cosmology for instruction of how these powers from these entities could become faculties in the human life. And so all of our physical organs in our bodies, one can put into those categories. And the Chinese meridian theory has developed a phenomenal understanding of the elemental intelligence that is flowing through the human body as energy, meridian energy, meaning that it is not a form or even a substance, it's just electromagnetic intelligence we call qi. And it could be constricted by different kinds of habits, or it could be expanded by different kinds of exercises to include higher, in the hierarchies of beings, higher creative powers to be able to sustain life in the form itself, but to also allow society to emerge from that. So one process of trust, the trust is the intelligence to which I dedicate my uncertainty until it becomes certain. I give myself a freedom to step out of the predictable cycle that gives me pattern and then go into time. So trust allows beginning. It allows me to dedicate my awareness to something that will begin. It is outside of my predictable interests. And it's the utilization of another kind of intelligence. In different cultures that had mythological beings in their understanding, they could tell you which entity you're using to do whatever you do, because it was understood as above, so below, as what we are, a microcosm of the macrocosm of beings. And in this process, the initiation is not, we say, lost. It is just hidden in the complexity of our civilization. And so modernity is still an initiatory exercise. We just don't know who the entities are that is causing us to have our conflicts. We just personalize it and project it on people and create a psychological field of cause and effect and blame and all of that for something happening to us. And it's moved from the gods being the reason for it to being human beings being the reason for it. And this is a certain way, it's not a wrong thing to say that human beings are the cause of what's happening, but under what influence have they become the source of our antagonisms? And in a way, most therapies are utilizing the same processes that allowed the intellect to be developed to find the cause of what's causing the inner disturbances of our consciousness. The reverse is happening in therapeutics right now, to find the God that is causing the illness. Holding into the God, the laws, the cognitive states, something outside of time, we're now calling trauma. Something outside of the body. Where is the trauma? As much as we can put it into the body, we're putting it into a time when something happened that we didn't have the capacity to overcome. And we are now seeing that as we look at our present age in all its complexity, we are actually refining our initiatory understanding of where we are in time and the consciousness flow from knowing what we should prepare for to now only responding to how we recover from what we didn't prepare for. But it is the same procedure. Can we go into the known and find the unknown? Or can we go into the unknown and find the known? All of them are pedagogies that uses consciousness to do one thing, find the human being and understand what is happening to us. And in the exercise, as you pointed, for activism, and this has been part of my life for a long time, started with helping enemies, rival gangs, find the agreement in which their mutual interests could be understood. They thought the mutual interest will be the annihilation of the other. They inherited that kind of story. Until I said, go into the future 5 years from now, tell me what you see. They all, when I was helping them create, they had a gang truce happening and they wanted an organization to manage it. And I wanted to facilitate this process for them. And the exercise was go into the imagination 5 years from now and tell me what you see. Even if they didn't include the other in their imagination, because they didn't have yet the courage to do so, they described the same reality. They wanted the same thing. And I said, well, if you wanted to guarantee that you will get the future that you're imagining, include your enemy. When they did, the vibrancy increased, meaning it became more practical to do. Because the part that they couldn't rationalize, what if my enemy is invisible in the future that I'm trying to create? And by me not including them consciously, I'm taking a risk of not having that future at all. And so this is part of the exercise. Can we include our fears in the futures that we are attempting to understand? Can we include all the unknowns and ask, what are the capacities that make it such that we overcome the fears and the limitations and create a reality that actually moves that fear out of the way, or create another kind of knowing that move what is possible into what is probable and what is to be actually true. Activists can learn to do that. There are many aspects of the civil rights movement, the human rights movement, other movements that are coming to the world that depended upon this faculty of cognizing inclusion of forces that normally are left out or projected upon or isolated from or exiled. And this is a critical part of, say, modernity. It's the challenge of it is that it wants to be exclusively free of the other. And more, we see the risk of creating something that is not welcoming of, these uncertainties and creating certain limitations of exclusion. And part of our work in people call it now sacred activism, different things. It doesn't matter what the name, it depends on these capacities. Can I host realities that will wake me up to the initiatory task of asking how do I have to be for something different to be in the world? I am the host of the world. There is no world without me. The world is not given. World is an understanding of parameters of shared interests. And I could elevate my view of the world in which things that are to come into the world either come through me or come through someone else. But I must become a seer, not of the world, but of the capacities that will create it. There is no world if we don't perceive interest in others. And many aspects of our work comes from my teachers who were part of the at that time the Theosophical Society in the 30s and 40s, working on the establishment of the frameworks for the United Nations and the agreement structures that will allow a body of seers at that time to understand the collective responsibility for the freedoms that had to come and end the wars that try to overtake the intelligences that are trying to inspire world creation. And that was a long, so I'll probably straight off your point by now. So I hope it follows your question, Matt.
No, it does. It's a difficult teaching, though, I think, because, I mean, in some sense, what I hear you speaking to is the inner meaning of this statement that is made in the Gospels by Jesus: "Love thy enemies," and the way in which the adversary must be met and hosted in a way. And I mean, the difficulty of the teaching is in understanding this, say, in the context of karma, in that as Martin Luther King Jr. would put it, I cannot be who I am supposed to be until you are who you are supposed to be, and you cannot be who you are supposed to be until I am who I am supposed to be. And so it's not simply that, if something bad happens to me, it's my fault because I'm not the right kind of person, because we're so bound up in this that in a sense we all share collective responsibility, yet until each of us takes responsibility, we continue to fray, to lose trust in one another, in the capacity to host one another, including even those who we have met as adversaries up until this point. But can you speak a little bit more to the role of the adversary, of adversarial powers, human or not human, in this process of human evolution, and maybe go a little bit, I mean, what you shared was already quite deep, but share a bit with us your understanding of the nature of evil, perhaps, and how activists, when we want to make the world a better place, obviously many times we relate to that desire as though we're entering into battle with evil forces of one kind or another. And what is the role of evil in this process of becoming more human?
Yeah, I'd say what it was. I don't know. It's hard to say what it is now. What evil was for humanity was a source of inspiration. right? It was for us to ask what is to be known. What it was a kind of introduction to the framework we now call knowledge.
Hmm.
Right? In order to know something, I have to be separated from the source. Right? The idea of knowledge was the fact that we no longer could sustain source nature, or we call beginning. So in the book of Genesis, in beginning was the word, a framework that provided a context. The word was a context for understanding how beginning revealed itself. It left beginning and was the first evidence of beginning. Genesis is the evidence of beginning, not beginning itself. It's so critical to say the was is a separation from the source. In beginning, if everyone can go in beginning, there's no need for language. There's no need for even a body to receive anything. We dissolve ourselves and can enter into beginning. But this particular, to know that I could begin, I have to achieve a certain kind of distinction in freedom. Another word that we really haven't yet fully understand because we're still working at experiences of freedom. But one of the particular freedoms in our time is the freedom from resentment. Right? Because we say to our bodies that I shouldn't feel persecuted. I do not want the feeling of persecution. Well, anything that's separated from its mother is persecuted. Any intelligence that's separated from its source experiences persecution, adversarial forces. We call them adversarial forces. They're really only waking up the latent potential to begin again.
Mm.
But it's not to stop. Evil is not to stop good. It's to actually encourage it. It's to encourage beauty. It's to encourage all of the virtues that remove the veil of persecution into the realization that in the nature of the word, of the logos, I am on both sides of the abyss. I'm in beginning and I'm in the loss simultaneously. And I'm in dialogue with procedures that reunite me until all numbers become one. All stages of, we say, steps of becoming become one. The reverse. We now have 9 as a higher number than 1. No. 1 is still the highest number. Why? Because it matures all other steps of expression of how we got to 9. How we got to a level in which the mineral world is so present that it holds the most profound feelings some thunder. I don't know if you're hearing it.
I was wondering what it was. Yeah.
Yeah, yes, lightning and thunder across here.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, this is the interaction with this force. Now, in different civilizations and different cosmologies, evil is put into categories that will allow human beings to progress through this initiatory dynamics. And some people, based on their own inner processes of acceptances, accept light and sometimes evil as a way of interacting with their own consciousness. But it's in a certain way a dialogue outside of the influence they have on the human being. It is a dialogue of what has lost beginnings so much that it forgets, say, the moral intuitions to return. And as soon as we start loving someone that has embodied evil, their own moral intuitions become awakened. What we call it now, their conscience. Why? Because there is something in it that wants to be known, wants to be understood. Evil wants to be understood. Its nature is to experience such exile that without human beings, it cannot return to beginning. So these are dramatizations in all civilizations. When I say dramatizations, initiatory spaces in how we come to understand the forces that are acting on existence itself. And for something to leave beginning as an experience and into existence as processes, we require steps, or we call evolutionary steps, to discern how far we are away from this particular unity. And our neurotransmitters, interesting, that in our nervous system and in the neurotransmitters, why is it that our neurotransmitters could create behaviors we call evil? Why can we cognize it? Because the processes are already in us to awake conscience, to awake other kinds of motives. But it has a far more like beyond if we can say, if we look into our history and say, what is the most evil thing that have been done by human beings to others, the planet itself? We've not exhausted it yet. We've not learned enough yet from evil. We're still thinking it's a moderate space. We don't know the extremity of it quite yet. Because that level of initiation, that real level of initiation, even as it is expressed in the Bible, hasn't come close to understanding its power and its nature. And yet we are given the task to make sense of it. So for me, I'm hopeful that we still have stem cells in our blood. Why? They're outside of the reach of evil. They're outside of the reach of biology. Even though it's in the blood, it's outside of the incarnated human being. Our blood is not only in our body. Our blood remains in beginning. It holds our ancestors. It holds the ecology of nature. And it holds the intelligence of the creators of world becoming. It just needs the right word, organize. And it requires, this is a kind of a door that can only be opened from the inside, meaning evil can't get in to where the blood starts, where it's real, essentially. We can only be the ones letting in anything that stops us from being human. And so for me, in the creative act of meeting our world crisis, we are asked to be seers of certain other hidden dimensions in our society. And maybe we could, in these exercises of consciousness studies in different parts, to really go into our philosophical tradition, but more so our mythological tradition, and ask, who is betting on us to win or lose in relationship to the courage it takes to acquire knowledge of love, knowledge of light, and knowledge of life beyond physical existence? Because these still are the three motives that the gods still have about the human initiatory path. Can we love each other or hate each other? Can we invest in life or annihilate life? And can we encourage hosting the light of the divinities that are moving through our blood? It is still three things that all wars are fought over.
Thank you, Orland. I'll open it up and stop hogging you all to myself here. But I remember in your reflections now on the nature of beginning and knowledge and evil, I was thinking of this story you tell in your book about being a young boy and being given this assignment to watch a seed grow in a jar. And that in observing it morning after morning, seeing how the water would evaporate and the light would hit the seed and gradually it would germinate, you learned something about the nature of time, but also you came to see, and maybe this is what you mean here by beginning, that intersecting time as this developmental unfolding is the eternal, which is always present with us now. And while time and history is full of tragedies, traumas, there's always access to that beginning, the eternal in the present, that allows us maybe to see the wholeness of time and then trust, despite whatever has happened in the past, that the future can be different if we decide together to make it so.
The past and future is still wrapped up in our memory, right? So in the processes of acquired experience and memory, ours and our ancestral memory, the physical body has 5 generations of memory imprinted in the body. So we have 62 personalities that are in a certain way, in a kind of discourse of what would our primary substance of genetics become, right? Does it become more like my ancestors, or do I have another sense of future of what that memory ought to be? And in present quantum science and genetics and such, we're discovering that the human potential for distinction, for becoming so unique, that one person could become a species in and of ourselves. We could become a host for a level of discernment in which I am not carrying the characteristics of my past to the degree in which I play out historical realities. Now, the light forces that make that, I mean, I heard the title of your book, and I'm just, when I hear this etheric process, Matt, I'm saying the etheric body interacts with laws distinct from the physical body. The astral body interact with laws distinct from the astral body. And so if we have all these other members of ourselves that are not tied into the genetics of our inheritance, who am I becoming? Every time I sleep, who do I wake up as? And how much sleep do I need to become free? And if not sleep, then what are the waking forces that I could engage with to be able to dialogue with my ancestors in a different way, host them in a different way, that they release the consent to not possess me, but inspire me to become myself. And if they vacate this space that they occupy in my sense perceptible organs, who takes that place? We must understand our ancestors before we understand the divinities. The divinities will not replace our ancestors. They don't intervene in our inheritances. They provide a context of inspiration for us to be willing to ascend through the transformational fields of intelligence and give back to the spiritual world what we have corrupted. We have corrupted our past, and we have to transmute it and give it back to the spiritual world as faculties of consciousness, that they may occupy it with more divine inspirations, so that we don't repeat certain patterns. Consciousness is reality, and unless we keep seeing the consciousness of past times in our civilization, we've not yet utilized the field of intelligence we call inspiration. It's a feeling. So intelligence moves from perception to a feeling, and then from a feeling to the idea of truth, that I am more in my future than I'm in my past. My past corrupts my future. When I said past, I'm not saying the legitimacy of experience. I'm saying the repetition of it is an error. The human being is more enlightened by improvisation than repetition. And so I can choose to be new, not for the sake of avoidance, but total responsibility for what has happened and what should not continue to happen if I choose other pathways of development. And so I think this is the intersection of modernity, indigeneity, and sacred hospitality for other levels of reality that must come into our world, because we are the hosts of what happens next.
Well, as host, it is now my responsibility to as I said, stop hogging you to myself. It's been a delight, Orland, to be in deep dialogue with you.
Yeah, thank you.
And I welcome other questions and comments from everyone else who's been present with us this first hour. You can all use your react button with the raise hand, or just go like this and Afshin will see you. I see Naya or Naya has raised their hand.
Yeah, you got it. It's Naya.
Naya. Hi, Naya. Please.
Hi.
Hi.
I first want to say thank you, and I'm very impressed with the level of thought you've given to this topic. I'm a first year PhD student, and my academic lineage is similar to yours. I feel very fortunate. Like, I went to an HBCU and I was trained in kind of Black radical thought and ancient African traditions, and a lot of these concepts that you're speaking to in a very broad way. And at this point in my journey, I've found myself asking a lot of questions that you were able to speak to tonight. And one of the two, actually, that I feel like you touched on well is I've been reading a lot of scholarly work from the 1970s to the early 2000s in Black psychology. And it's very insightful in the fact that it is able to comprehensively critique Eurocentric cultures from that social activist perspective. But I have been running into contradictions in reading this work, trying to figure out, well, if we are going to value our spiritual traditions and these concepts and what they really say, can we wholeheartedly reject whiteness and white culture and all of these things we don't like? If what we're saying is true in the spiritual realm, then in the physical, it seems like we'd have to try to work towards accepting these things about cultural realities that we don't like, that we've labeled as oppression. And I haven't been able to find anybody that speaks to that topic. So I'm really grateful for that. And then the other one that I've found myself stuck on is, on the one hand, really valuing the spiritual wisdom from these ancient African traditions, but also questioning, if they understood so much about the nature of reality, how did we still end up here? And what is the meaning of this? Or is there a meaning within it? Like, how did history still unfold if we already knew these things? And you touched on that to some extent. And I think, to your point, like, it's still an unfolding process and we're figuring it out. So with all that out of the way, I guess my next question would be, do you have any recommendations for additional reading or organizations or anybody to look to as a mentor? Because, like I said, you're speaking to a lot of things that I've encountered in my own journey, and it seems like you have answers to questions I've been racking my brain over, and it seems like there's a lot of potential here to go a bit further than what my lineage has exposed me to thus far.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Naya. I'm inspired by your framing of the questions as well. I was part of a group here in Los Angeles called the Aquarian Spiritual Center that was founded in 1941 by Dr. Alfred Lagan, who drew a lot of his exploration from the African Gnosis tradition, particularly what was called Kemetic wisdom tradition or Egyptian wisdom tradition. And many who wanted to restore the value of initiation that goes back to ancient Egypt and the subsequent contributions to what emerged as the Western civilization. One has to consider that it's in the thousands of years and in a certain way had a global procedure that affected many other areas of the world without physical contact. Egypt was a host for world becoming without becoming, say, colonizers of the world. Why? They use light differently than we do now. They use the ecology of the earth in a very different way than we do now. One can say people are looking for mechanisms of how that civilization emerged. They're looking for technologies and all kinds of research other than the particular nature of being that habitated the world at that time, that had even the language of the gods accessible to them. So Ptah as creative utterance was the same force that created the worlds in the book of Genesis. They had knowledge of initiatory rites that can go into the world of the dead and come back. These things have been lost. And so in the restoration of African gnosis, there were many initiates that went into scholarship, meaning they had to write the books necessary to help articulate what happened in the loss of the wisdom of ancient culture, classical culture in Africa, and why the initiatory spaces were not fought over with wars, but sustained by the understanding of what we now call reincarnation. With certain laws, a person died one day can reappear again in the next. Why? They understood time differently. They utilized time differently. So why was so much loss happening to African civilizations? Because they had sacred hospitality, even for the enemy. They could not resent and withhold the sacred knowledge because it was not to be possessed in those ways. They were not naive, but again, they understood evil in a very different way. They understood that those who violate these sacred laws would need help when their time to go into the underworld and face the gods. They what was called the 42 negative confessions. And so they were taught, I did not do these things, not I ask for forgiveness for having done that. Right? They protected the soul from corruption, even if their body was killed. This is gnosis. The higher purpose first, the physical existence after. Over time, yes, different groups, different priesthoods took on different tasks and also changed the trajectory of African wisdom traditions, in which the classical level fell into tribalism there as well. So before contact with, we can say, white culture, Africans had lost most of theirs in the truthfulness of interaction with divinity. After those classical Egypt failed, they went into West Africa and then further back into South Africa. And it was to be reimagined in South Africa when the Dutch Rosicrucians went to South Africa, when white people who were studying again the star wisdom, after it had been reintroduced in the 1700s by Christian Rosenkreuz. The trajectory was that the next mystery school would be in South Africa. However, the task again got corrupted because civilizations clash. People were now fighting over substance again, you know, and many of the kingships had also become protectors of the realm, particularly the realm of nature. For example, King Shaka. Most people thought he was very brutal and violent against human beings in the wars that occurred with the Boers and the British. But it was not just a violation that of human to human aspect that was so, hurtful to him. Was the fact that he had more laws on the protection of nature than any other group, even now. He had laws to protect the waters because he understood their divinity. He had the animals, you could not build homes where the animals migrate. It was a violation of the highest laws of his kingdom. So for people who built things, temples and churches and all of that, to come into his kingdom and start rearranging the divinity of his appreciation for nature, he went into war with that. But it's also a violation of the right of sacred hospitality. So it's a very complex field. What are we in conflict with? What happens in the effort to restore the human space in relationship to these higher wisdom traditions? And what happens to the soul once we leave the body? These are what we were working on through different methodologies of initiatory exercise. And people who came from Africa to these United States, before it actually was even constitutionalized and became a nation, working with the indigenous communities here to make it possible for other agreements to be reached. Right? Black people in the diaspora contributed to so much of Western civilization, but was not even given credit for it. And this is a critical thing. What we are signing, for the most part, is not including the currency that we use now as the dollar. It's not a conception of white people. Right? The tradition of knowledge has to be understood not only from the text of intellectualism, but from the initiatory aspect of the chronological and archetypal knowledge that is still imprinted in the Akashic field that we're responsible for developing faculties to assess and get out of the complex, the psychological complex of the history that is actually misinformed about even who met whom and why. Why did people migrate to certain places? All of it is not accurate. And yes, there are many, the list, I would ask Michael, we can make a list of some recommendations that he can pass on. Michael, if you can, help me pull together some things. But one I would just point out, Dr. George G.M. James wrote a book called Stolen Legacy. And this is one of a critical assessment of what is initiation in the Egyptian cultist tradition, mysticism in there, and the interaction with the West, in which the pathways for Western philosophical tradition was developed in Egypt. And what happened with, again, the human blood has its own mysteries in it. When people are taking knowledge and they don't understand it will have a consequence not only on them, but their ancestors. This is a critical thing to understand. That our knowledge is not just working on us, it's working on our past as well. All of it. And we're meeting this challenge again. So as far as I can go with the question for now, Naya, I hope it helps.
It does, and it brings up a lot of other thoughts, but I see other hands up and I don't want to monopolize all of your time. So I'll hand the floor over and then I'll probably reach out later on to kind of workshop some ideas, if that's okay.
That's okay. We're inviting that too. So thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead, Alexis.
Hi, thank you. Orland, thank you so much. Michael and Matt, thank you for bringing Orland here. It's always kind of feels like a transportation into a dream state with the privilege of getting to hear you speak. So I really appreciate that. I'm going to try and bring together a few questions that I have with some of what you've shared tonight. So my research is on an anthroposophical artist who is also a medium. And I think about this idea of language and you speaking about dialogue tonight. So I'm wondering if you might elaborate or share with me how knowledge is moved through image. She was also working out a glossary of some sort of new language. I'm still doing my research that's coming through her images. And so
Alexis, tell us her name. I don't think you didn't tell us.
Hilma af Klint. She was a Swedish artist. She died in 1944 and left a large body of work. And the board that's in charge of her work, it's a requirement that 4 of the main members are from the Anthroposophical Society. So you have so much wisdom, and I'm just curious how you think about the image and how that is in relation to the intellect and the imagination beyond or with or in conjunction with language. Something like that I'm wondering about, how you think about that. And also, I'll just throw in all my questions at once. This idea towards the end of you speaking about the ancestors and the idea of the past corrupting the future, and improvisation, if I'm understanding, disrupts repetition and disrupts a pattern. And so I'm wondering if you have, like, if we are uncertain of our ancestors, so many of us are uncertain of our ancestors, how you think about coming into some sort of dialogue there as a way of, feeding the gods. And yeah, I guess the last question I'll bring in is I was so grateful 2 summers ago to attend this beautiful ritual you put together in Los Angeles with Bio and Resme. And that was something that was so nourishing, and it really created something real, whereas I feel like so often there's sometimes maybe in spaces that are created, there's something that's not there, or there's something that that maybe there's an evacuation of spirit or something that was so palpably present. Again, hearing you speak in this dreamlike state that I'm speaking to. So I'm curious how we cultivate that, how we can bring that into the activism and into the world, because as you're speaking to, like, we're so deprived of these initiations. So I know those are maybe some large questions, but I wanted to bring them in. Thank you.
Oh, Alexis, thank you. Let me go back. I'll start from the last point of the place. For me, Los Angeles is not just a city; it's an oracle. It's a space in which a certain kind of divination can happen because of the complexity of not only the natural geography and ecology, but the complexity of memory that flows to it from other places, right? Every place on the earth are connected by meridians, and they facilitate an attractor for people to come there. I found that I really had to be here in the city to realize certain plausible futures. and I benefited from living into the memory of the place. And using memory as a kind of substantive attractor, right? So that transformations can happen. In the part of the Western mind development, migrations had to happen in order to allow the blood to go through a metamorphosis. Right? We could not depend only on cultural inheritances. It was a unique time in human being that allowed technology to develop mass migration. And people are moving around the world for something that has an interest on the supersensible level. And where cities develop, there is a strong impulse for, say, higher agreements than in a space where we only draw from nature. Cities, we're supposed to draw wisdom from the stars. We have something on a higher dimension of sleep to attain when we are in such large numbers in a particular place we identify with, even a country. And so these are areas where I think it's possible to recover a sense of why we are in place and what rituals could be developed out of that. The other point that really stands out about the frameworks that give rise to creativity, certain patterns are meaningful, and we call them music. Right, but then the music could move from the beautiful artistry of a Beethoven and Chopin and others to becoming Coltrane, in which an improvisation happens and jazz gets expressed. These are particular areas of discernment for individuals and groups to interact with sources of inspiration. So if you play, a particular music score from one of the classical European traditional music, even if it's repeated, it's being refined. So repetition can be refined to in which it has in it the archetype of its source. Who inspired it? Where did it come from? In fact, when you can listen to it, you can actually go to a place, and in most cases, go to a time that inspired the music, far beyond the time in which the artist articulated the conception. And that is true for the artist that you are pointing to, whose paintings required anthroposophical knowledge to interpret it, because in the painting, in this light stream of color, are signatures of other beings, meaning the names of angels are written into them and cannot be spoken to by word. They have to be perceived by color and tone and warmth. So the beholder of her art has to interpret it with a more exact moral intention and not grasp it with sight. These are techniques in the anthroposophical art pedagogies for moral observation. It's similar like Goethean science, in which to go into the phenomena of a reality, one must be able to develop the appropriate faculties for such. So it's a different kind of art in how it originated and what it serves. And in a certain way, it follows other traditions in which the language, like in Arabic and such, the letters are instruction. They remain instruction, even if it's read over and over again. It's never the same instruction. right? So people who read the Quran over and over as a discipline every cycle utilize different intuitions for such. So in a way, the art is a surviving capacity to move from perception to the beings in the idea realm, in which they're telling us why they inspired the creativity that came. And I hope I answer those three parts of your question in a way.
Yes, thank you so much, Orland. I'm always grateful these are being recorded. It is so I can listen again.
Yeah, me too. I sometimes I stray from my point and then figure out that, wow, something else was speaking as well. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Alexis. Is there anyone else who would like to contribute something? Otherwise, I have a question.
Yeah, please, Matt.
Oh, okay. I'll let Carolyn go first.
Thanks, Matt. Thank you, Orland. I'm really enjoying this. And my interest was piqued when you used this word refinement in your last answer. And I'm wondering if you can speak more to this concept of refinement and maybe the nuance of how refinement, from your perception, if it is different than repetition and how that might be important.
Yes, yes. Yeah, thank you. It's a key point in for me in the phenomenology of the blood as well. So every day we're refining this substance that it actually produces a body that can hold more of the future, right? So it's in the metabolic process of our nature to take something in and work on it until it becomes new. In fact, the body breaks down all substances into nothing and recreate itself from nothing. We can find mineral particles in it, but we can't exactly say it came from our food. You know, it can be found in our food, but it didn't come from our food, right? Because we can develop other capacities through fasting and develop a healthier body with more mineral, you know, vitality in it than if we eat food all the time. The human being exercises and develops consciousness. Everything that we do is an exercise of the will. Thinking, feeling, and will are exercises of the will, including our metabolic will that utilizes other forces to break down matter and create light. Right? We still only produce energy at a level in which we have incremental refinement of our matter into light. But imagine if we're to discern the power that is held in our mitochondria that creates cold fusion. Right? If that is released, it will consume, it will refine our planet. One person could refine our planet with light that is stored in our you know, inner life, forms. So the refinement in this sense, and this is what art and some sciences now allow us to do, is to inquire about the nature of the substance that produced the nature of the reality that we're in. But what is the essence for? What is the essence of the things for? What is gold really for? You know, we can use it in all the ways we do, communication, satellites, and all of that. You know, and you know, I remember meeting an elder in Africa, and he was sitting on a piece of cardboard doing his divination. And, you know, just to kind of give us a laugh, He lifted up the cardboard and he was sitting on a plate of gold. And for him, he said, oh, it's only just for my concentration. It's only for the exercise of utilizing other capacity to refine his vision in divination. And so he has no need to, monetize it, because the sacred task is understood. So are all our faculties. If we refine the use of them, we are able to engage other levels of communication. And our blood is a continuous exercise of refinement to hold passions and compassions for different stages of reality.
Thank you.
Yes, you're welcome.
Michael, I see your hand, please.
Thank you, Orland. Thank you, Matt. My question, I have a lot of questions, but I'm going to pick this one here about, it's about a quote from your book, and it's a very short passage. I'll just read it quickly. You say, the earth carries within it a capacity to make human beings indigenous wherever they are, not just in their native land or place of birth. To be indigenous in this deeper sense is to reformulate one's body in order to draw from the earth the creative willpower to be oneself, to fulfill one's purpose and destiny in a particular place. The earth can become a portal of initiation that gives us an exact coordinate for our path of life that restores the sense of home. You've spoken to a lot of the themes in this passage already. I'm wondering if you can talk to this idea of destiny and purpose and how our identities, you spoke about gangs earlier, having an identity or affiliation, how those factors, where we're from, our race, our gender, nationality, how those relate to purpose and destiny.
Yes. Yeah. So what is the absolute purpose? That would say there's purpose and the absolute purpose. The absolute purpose of anyone, anywhere, is to be here. Here is not the country or the city or even in your home. Here is a phenomenon in which all intelligences that want their purpose to be fulfilled can only come here by those who are here. So in the understanding of the star wisdom, the stars are trying to come here. And if I say with deep reverence and integrity, I am here, I become a host for something that is way out into the stars to be fulfilled on this particular place on earth. So the earth, the phenomena of the earth, not the place, but the earth, is integrity of self and other, to allow something that is somewhere else in time to become practically engaged and incarnated. If we put anything else in between that, we're keeping things only in the realm of possibility. And people now agree that all these things are possible, but not real. They could only be real if I'm here, on a plane in which manifestation can happen and which co-creation can happen. This is what language is for. our language allows us to point attentiveness and intentionality to a particular space and time in which an agreement can happen. A shared reality can happen. These processes, we can discern who has the right to what, but all of that is only denying the fact that if we share something, we actually have more, whatever it is. Why? Because when something is shared, when we have a shared purpose in something, the archetypal world reveals more complexities of it and more abundant vibrancies of it, in which abundance comes. So this is a kind of this is the power of magic. The act of influencing something to become real by utilizing time, space, and we call patterns or the archetypal dispensations that reveals the idea, the substance, and the form in which that manifestation can take. And the earth is the electromagnetic field that brings things into reality through the human creative act within and sometimes beyond nature. And in a way, you know, I mean, a lot of indigenous communities and conversations around this of appropriation and what is the right measure of exchange and permission and consent and such. All of this is still helping us relate to our will in such a way which we become more generous. The most comprehensive expression of our will is generosity. And people who have suffered through all kinds of oppressions have to protect their generosity. Why? It's a space in which divinities do their magic, in spite of the fact that people keep taking. We should not lose our generosity, because some parts of ourselves are not for this world, it's for the next one. It's for the afterlife of people, as people call it, for a discourse with other beings when the body is no longer in the way of the oppression. And I mean, the challenge of modernity is that it has given us feelings of resentment. That, if not transmuted and developed into, say, introspection of time, we would not be able to draw on certain inspirations from higher reality. And so it's not only the effort, like in civil rights movement, it was not just an effort to change minds and hearts. It was to evolve consciousness that other ecologies can come into the world. And so someone said it's a hard practice. It's a very hard practice. But just one thing I would want to share from the idea of absolute justice, spiritual discernment and choice, the complementary recognition of an inherent individual competency. Justice is an individual competency to resolve something. And then it has its social expansion. But the competency is actually divination. A social activist, over time, develops a discernment of what to offer the enemy that meets their needs. We're not fighting against you. I'm asking you to let me give you what you can give yourself. Most people think they have to take something from me to have what they have. Absolutely not. Yeah. There's some things I could give you that you cannot take. This must become the social will. To develop it, I have to reorganize this space of what is justice. It is not limited to the notion of cause and effect, but that the soul of an individual meets their destiny as an opportunity within the collective prevailing milieu, the nation or the world. We're asked to transform our passions. Justice is the transformation of passions, in which I develop awareness of my generosity towards time, meaning I can develop patience, I can develop space, I can be openness, and I could develop improvisation, the intelligence to create something from nothing. Meaning, I wait for the right inspiration.
I see your hand up.
Ask Michael, did that touch your question?
Yes, thank you.
Yes, it did? Okay, thank you, Mike. Thanks, Matt. Tyler?
Thank you. Thank you, Matt and Orland.
Yes.
I'm very moved by everything you've shared tonight, Orland. I'm feeling it very deeply in my body, and I'm grateful for everything that you've offered us. You mentioned silence, and silence is something I've been thinking about a lot recently, particularly as we are living in a world that's so infused with noise and activity and productivity. And I've been feeling the need to both be in a lot of silence myself, but also just thinking about the importance of silence in general. And I was really feeling, as you were speaking, a sort of immense silence within you that was sort of translating to me. And I'm not quite sure if I can fully formulate how to talk about that more. But I sense a silence that silence might be important to you, perhaps. And I'm wondering if you have anything to offer around how you might think about silence, how you experience silence, how we might cultivate more silence in our world, and what silence has to offer us that this sort of immense amount of activity and vocalization that we live amongst doesn't have to offer. So sort of silence as a counterbalance to our modes of communication and our modes of relating to one another, how we might find silence as an important part of also relating to one another, but in sort of a different mode.
Wow, yeah, thank you. Yeah, I'm deeply committed to silence and solitude, and in a certain way, gratitude for the uniqueness of my gifts of being. You know, I feel like what I'm receiving, even without my effort, is because of a certain kind of I call love from other beings. I'm gifted substances that make themselves part of me. In my will, I am just willing. I'm willing to really become human. It starts with that. It starts with becoming aware that I'm not in control of time as I think I am. Right? And I could observe when something is changing in me that reveals the synchronistic activity in the world. But I know I place my attention at a level in which I could observe synchronicity. You know, I could support my awareness being engaged with people who have mental discords, meaning a different bandwidth in consciousness, in which I could be in dialogue with them as normal. It requires a certain kind of silence to enter their unique mind. It's probably one of the most sacred acts in my life to just not let my mind sound discords around the potential harmonic vibrancy that another human being brings. And if I listen, I can hear how my own heart is beating from what they say, even sometimes coming more alive from that. But as a training, I remember that one of the first times it happens, I sitting with someone that was dying, and the shift happens in which we transcended the physical states into other levels of speechless understanding, in which futures were revealed that were to be fulfilled only in another kind of understanding, not just literal understanding. But some things became so absolutely literal, in which he was talking to me about how he wanted to be buried and where and all these things. And, you know, in taking up the responsibility, you know, the nurses were telling me it's dementia, like don't worry, that is not coherence. But I listened with a very thoughtful awareness and saw all other things that he was describing played out around his funeral, and helped him affirm his spiritual will by helping the choices be made of what he wanted to happen. And so this part of the human being is for me quite something. You know, but for families that have had really strong challenges with their adolescent children, you know, all kinds of rebellion and all that. And parents, look at the child when they're asleep. Look at their silence. Understand it again. As a baby, the parents knew it. As an adolescent, there's so much, you know, forces that pass through them that parents are agitated by the awake adolescent because they demand a lot of forces of attention. But when they're asleep, we reconnect how they receive our awareness. And the parents fall back in such profound intuitive certainty and trust of their child, and a total different relationship. Almost the child remembers being seen when they wake up. These are things that just excite me about researching different states of consciousness and what brings the human being into love and engagement, so that we meet. One young man, I had schizophrenia many years ago, and the mother asked if I could meet with him. I spend around 20 hours some days, 20 hours of observation, only observation, no judgment, no assessment, until we met. He and I met in a space, but I remember how my own mind had to agree with certain distortions of what we call reality. The forces that entered into my perception were stronger than my normal sense. And then because we were in disagreement, he allowed me to guide him back with the same idea: I am here. I am here. We repeated it hundreds of times. I am here. And the phenomena, what I'm talking about, this space between beings. His girlfriend was pregnant and went into labor. And as soon as the child was born, his full coherence came in, and he was here. I took him from the psychiatric hospital to his daughter's birth hospital the same day, and the schizophrenia went away. We have certain plausible futures that can only be shared with intelligences that have a non-verbal, non-logical acceptances of what the human being can hold. And for me, it is just my practice to explore them and see where we meet and when. Did that meet your question, Tyler?
It did, very much so. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much.
Well, thank you so much, Orland. You have a way of inviting attention from us when you are speaking that does quiet the mind and invite us into a kind of silence. And so, a certain kind of speech need not be the opposite of silence. It invites a deeper container of silence around it. And I so appreciate the space that you have created for us, that we have created together to share tonight. It's been a real joy and deepening, and I will approach my own sleep this evening with a different consciousness than I may otherwise have. So thank you for that. Afshin, did you want to say anything to close, or?
Yeah, Orland, well, thank you so much for trusting us to receive. As Matt said, you have this outpour of wisdom, but at the same time, it feels like you are hosting us within that, which is such an amazing thing to experience. And I definitely felt that this dialogue had allowed me to move between certain static boundaries that happen through this repetition of the same that happens in my day-to-day life. And I'm hoping that through this dialogue that creates this future, I'm able to revisit this repetition of novelty that is fruiting from this discussion. So once again, thank you. And thank you, Matt. And thank you, Michael, and everyone else who made this possible, and everyone who is able to make it tonight. Just an appreciation for all of you. And I'm happy that we got this PCC forum up and running again. And thank you for the Center for Black and Indigenous Praxis for co-hosting this. And I wish you all a good night.
Yeah, thank you so much. And if you may, just to Dr. McDormand, who was here with us earlier, please give him my best regards. I was so honored that he had chosen to join, be part of this. It's been years since I've been in direct contact, but thank him for me as well.
We will pass that along. Absolutely.
Thank you, everyone.
Take care.
Night.
Good night.
Good night.